we had a bit of a moment there where we realized that we couldn't find the record button, but we have found it. So, okay, so the recording has officially started. All right. Okay, so just an overview of what we're going to cover today. This training, so it is an advanced training, mostly focused on more day-to-day administrator activities in Outcome Tracker. So there are a lot of features in Outcome Tracker that we intend to cover more specifically in additional training. So if you have any ideas about more advanced topics that we don't cover today, please do send us a message and we can organize that at a later date. But for today, what we're going to do is give you a tour of the setup tab. So this is where a lot of the administrator functions are, where they're located. So we'll cover managing user accounts and security groups, as well as the security formatting of your Outcome Tracker site. We will look at managing tabs, so what you see in your client records, and also how to manage questions and drop-down lists. Something that's a little bit new is some data management techniques, so how to hopefully do data cleanup a little bit more quickly when it comes to your reports, and as well as some options, some very basic review of form actions. We will cover queries and reports, mostly copying queries and building simple reports out of queries. And then towards the end, this may not apply to all of you, so we've put it at the end if any of you want to leave the webinar a bit early. We're covering just the basics of HS reporting, so your monthly Schedule D submissions to the province. So our goals today are really to develop your understandings of the OT support resources and protocols that are available to you as you work in the database, where in the system you can access frequently used features and tools, to develop your comfort managing user account security groups and permissions to meet your shelter needs, tools to identify and correct data entry errors, which is something that many of you are responsible for as OT administrators, copying and modifying network queries and reports, and lastly, reviewing and submitting your Schedule D data. So hopefully, by the end of the day or the morning, you're comfortable with all of these features. So to start, I just want to give a bit of background about ACWS. We have a lot of new staff who are new administrators, and we just want to give a bit of background about what our role is in terms of Outcome Tracker and the network of shelters working in the province. So ACWS is an ambassador organization, so we have 42 members across the province who work collaboratively to develop collective knowledge about domestic violence in the province, to inform solutions and to inform their work. So really focused on developing resources for our members and developing a common message about the work that we're doing. So we are not human services. We're often confused with human services because of the support we lend with reporting to different funders, but we are separate from a funder. We are here to support you to meet all of your requirements for your funders, but we ourselves are not funders. Just support in general, yeah. Okay, so I'll also introduce myself quickly, and Amy's going to introduce herself. So I've been with, well, my name's Kat Van Willingen. I've been with ACWS for about 15 months. I started 15 months ago when Amy went on her maternity leave, and I've been working part-time while I've been in school, and I've just finished school now and working a bit more regularly on Outcome Tracker and working with a lot of you on your Outcome Tracker projects. Amy?
Hi everyone, can you hear me? Good. My name is Amy Markier, and I am Research and Evaluation as well with Kat. I've been with ACWS now for 3 years. Before that, I was a program policy analyst for the BC government in women and children's health in population and public health. So part of our portfolio there was violence against women, and as well I was involved in the development of a database for the Ministry of Health for a specific program. So that's sort of my background in domestic violence and database development as well. And Kat and I have essentially the same role here at ACWS in terms of supporting shelters with the use of the database and the development of the database, and as a liaison between shelters and the government as well.
Thanks, Amy. I should mention too, I missed a bit of my background that might be relevant. So I used to work at the YWCA of Calgary, supporting their shelter program with Outcome Tracker. So I've been involved with Outcome Tracker really since its beginnings back in 2010. Oh, what a nice segue. So now we're going to talk a little bit about Outcome Tracker. So Outcome Tracker was implemented in 2010 when HOMES was discontinued. So it was a great opportunity, and the shelters and ACWS collaborated on identifying Outcome Tracker as a database that they could design and own together. So they purchased a collective license and have been working to develop the database in a way that really reflects that larger picture of their work. And we as ACWS, we administer the design of Outcome Tracker. Okay, so part of what makes the collective license work so well is that we have support protocols that help us minimize costs, or I guess support the development of the system as efficiently as possible. So you as OT administrators are really the first point of contact if members of your shelter team are having issues with Outcome Tracker. So we advise that they bring their issues to you, and you work together to try to address the issues. If you are having challenges at the shelter figuring out what's going on, then please contact Amy and I via email. So we are there to support you guys with all of your concerns related to Outcome Tracker. And then if we can't identify the issue, we then together, so administrators and the support team, will contact the VistaShare support team to dig a little deeper into what might be causing the problems. So that's sort of the, I guess, the flow of OT support. Oh, and our policy is that we will get back to you in 1 business day. So if it is an extremely urgent request, please do indicate so in your email. Otherwise, Amy and I will get back to you within 1 business day and begin troubleshooting. Okay, so some of the resources that are available to you. So we have an ACWS member-only website, and there we have a lot of, that's where we post a lot of our resources. So we have the ACWS Outcome Tracker Manual, which was revised in the fall, and that has been included as a handout in this webinar, so you should have a copy of it available to you. We will be revising this manual again this summer to accompany new training videos. So we will be creating videos for all of our basic training and our advanced training to support you all with training within your shelter and tackling some of the more difficult projects in Outcome Tracker on your own. And lastly, there is the Outcome Support tab. It is, I would say, a bit more technically oriented, so some of the language is, it's not super accessible, I find, but there are a lot of helpful resources there as well, and some additional training videos should you want to look at some of the more advanced features in Outcome Tracker through their support tab. Okay, so now we're ready to dive in to the actual training portion of the webinar. So just in a bit more detail, we're going to review the administrator functions in OT that are located on the Setup tab. So we're going to look at security configuration, again, accounts and permissions, people and organizations features like defining tabs and merging duplicate names, and working with questions and drop-down lists. So we'll exit out of here and dive right in. So this is the Outcome Tracker Setup tab. This is, as administrators, you are the only people in your shelter that have access to this tab, and that's because there's a lot of implications in making changes under this tab in terms of how data entry and reporting will function on your site. So it's important that not everyone has access to these features. So I'm going to start basically in the upper left and work my way down, but we're going to have a look at the security configuration of your site. So I will click on the security configuration. So under the agency setup, you have the option to customize how your staff, so your accounts, your user accounts, function on the site. So you can set up automatic logouts for people. So if somebody leaves their desk or leaves their desk unattended for longer than, say, 10 minutes, they will be automatically logged out of the system. And that's just something that will prevent anyone from coming along and being able to access information that's stored in your site. You can set automatic expirations for passwords. So if you would like staff to have to change their passwords so frequently, you have the option to do that here as well. You can limit the number of times that a password can be reused. You also can automatically deactivate an account if there are so many failed login attempts, and this is a standard security feature. So if somebody tries to log in 5 times with the wrong password, they just get locked out, and you would have to go back in and reactivate their account to verify that it was them attempting to log in. And the rest of these, you can customize warnings that appear for staff, but these are, I would say, sort of not necessary. They're nice to have, but not especially necessary. So, okay, so a quick summary of that. Now we will look at managing user accounts. So we often get requests for support to set up user accounts, and so I do want to take you guys through the process of setting up a user account. So the first step in doing so is going to People Organizations. And what we have to do when we're setting up a new user account, so when we have a new staff, is to add them to the system under People Organizations first, under the staff role. Oops. Sorry, I'm just going to minimize this. So we will enter the new staff person. We will choose the staff role and click Add. Okay. So once that's complete, we can return to the Setup tab and choose Manage User Accounts here. So here we have a list of all of the accounts, historical and current, that have been in our site. And towards the bottom of that list, to the right, we have the option to add a user account. So in the name field, I'm going to start typing in the name of the staff person who I just entered as into the staff role under People Organizations. And I'm going to assign them a security email. So we do recommend that each user account has a unique email associated with it, and this is just for security reasons. So I will add my email address here. Oops. And you can also customize the username here, so we could add a 1 here if we want, or any way that you want to customize it. Some people prefer to do an initial with the last name, so it's really up to you. But the standard is generally what we use here at ACWS. And then I choose a security group that I want to add them to. So some shelters have more advanced security groups if they have a lot of programs that have privacy limits between them, but a lot of our shelters really just have the basic users, which is designed for our frontline staff who are entering data and viewing data, and advanced users who are more involved in reporting, and then administrators. So those are the 3 basic groups that we have. So administrators would be all of you who have full access to the site. So once I've selected the appropriate security groups, I can just add this user. And they're now in the system. And I will close out of here because I'm only adding the one staff. And I will find that staff in my user account list here. So they are now invited. And they will receive an email inviting them to log into Outcome Tracker to complete the process of setting up their user account, so setting up a password, etc. So you can also work with existing user accounts directly. So if I've opened up the new staff whose account I've just created, and you can see that I have the option to update their email address. So if someone's name changes and you need to update the email address, you can do so here. I also see a record of their invalid login counts. And so in the previous feature that we looked at, setting up the security configuration, you had a maximum login option, a login failure option, I should say. And so this is where you would go to unlock the account should there be an issue with staff logging in too many times with the wrong password. I can also customize the activation date, and this is just a nice way of tracking like staff history of use in the system. So a staff was active between this date and this date. So when you're deactivating an account, it is nice to also include the deactivation date for that record should you need it. And then I have the option here to just disable the account if I need to. So it's just a matter of ticking the box. Lastly, if you have sent an account invitation, as I have, it's active for, I believe, 24 hours. And so if someone does not attempt to log in and set up a password in that time, the invitation will expire. And so this is where you would resend the account invitation. Okay. So I will just take you back to the picking a username window to show you an additional feature. And what I'll do is maybe go into, let's go into Susan's. So when someone is an existing user, they've set up their password, you have different options down here at the bottom. So you have the option to resend their username. So if someone has forgotten their username or password, you can send them a password reset link, or you can resend them their username. Okay, so those are the basics of setting up and managing user accounts. We're going to go back to permissions and look a little bit at permissions. Okay. Okay, so this is the security groups and permissions. So for those of you who may not know this, the way Outcome Tracker works is that there are sort of two ways that what you see in the system is restricted. So roles that are assigned to women or children accessing your services determine what tabs show up to allow for data entry into certain activities or certain activities in Outcome Tracker. And then staff are limited on what data they can see for women and children in the site by whether or not they're assigned permission to view for those roles. So I hope that makes sense. So we have on the left here, we have all of the security groups in Outcome Tracker. You can create new security groups. So depending on how many programs you have at your shelter and how restricted privacy is for those programs, you may want to consider creating new security groups for those programs and then only assigning certain staff the ability to view data entered in tabs that are associated with that role. So creating a new user group is very simple. We create the user group. We can describe who has access to it, either explicitly with their titles or just something to guide you along in understanding who might belong in that security group when you're adding new staff or moving existing staff around in security groups. So we'll just create this. So now if I click on the test group along the left here, I'm now seeing on the right the properties, memberships, and permissions of this group. So these will all be empty at the moment. Okay, so let's look at permissions and how they're organized in the site. So as I mentioned, roles are one way to limit what people see, what staff see in terms of what's on a client record and outcome tracker. So we always have the option to add all names, which means that staff have the ability to see information for everyone regardless of the program. Or we can choose specific roles for that staff person. So if this staff person is only working in childcare, I can choose just the childcare roles from the available column on the left here and use the arrow to make those roles available in the security group. So whatever is added to the right here is what will be available to members of this security group. I also have the option to restrict specific fields. So fields are the data entry spaces for questions in Outcome Tracker. And generally, we make all fields available because it becomes quite challenging on forms when you get very specific about what questions are viewable and not viewable. So I will add all fields. You can also restrict by activity types. So some shelters label some activities as forms and some activities as surveys and that type of thing. Not everyone is using this, but you do have the option to also restrict permissions this way. So if you do want to explore this option, I would say this is a good place to contact Amy and I for support. So for today's sake, we will add all activity types. And then tabs and functions. So again, this gets a little bit more complex, quite complex. So we'll do a quick overview. So again, we have the option to do all tabs and functions. I'll just point out what each of these means. So this is the activities tab, which means that staff would have the option to see this activities tab up at the top. We have the enrollment pop-up function, which means that anytime there is a pop-up in Outcome Tracker, so if you are, for instance, let's go into Tinkerbell's record here. So if I'm in Tinkerbell's record under her activity list, and I want to enroll her in an activity, this is a pop-up. So that permission would allow you or allow staff to use pop-ups under the activity list. And we have the People Organizations tab, which generally speaking we want all staff to be able to access. If staff are working with reports, we would want to give them access to the Reports tab. Oh, and here's the People Organizations tab. And again, we have the Setup tab, which is something that we restrict for administrators only, so we don't recommend making this available to staff. And then the Support tab, where you would access VistaShare support, which is just at the top here. So again, that's a high-level overview. There's obviously a lot of detail involved in working with this, but if you do want to explore working with permissions a bit more, these are the basics, and you can contact us for more information. Okay, and now we'll work with membership. So at the beginning, when we added our new staff, we had the option to automatically enroll them in a security group, which we did. So we added them to the basic users group. Now, if you have staff that work in your shelter or organization who are moving between programs or between, someone is going from being a frontline staff to an OT administrator, you would go into the administrator's permission group and you would add them as members to this group, and it's as simple as that. So again, these are the available members, so you will have a list here of all of the staff for all of the user accounts in your site that are active. And then you have the members to the right, which are the groups who are part of that permissions group. So this is where you can make changes to user account access in Outcome Tracker. Okay, so let's go back to the Setup tab. And let's look at some of the functions in people, under people and organizations. So another request that we get quite frequently in terms of support is how to work with tabs in Outcome Tracker. So tabs, as we see in Tinkerbell's record, these are all of the tabs that are available based on the roles that are assigned to Tinkerbell. So under the Setup tab, you can determine what tabs should show up for which roles in terms of limiting what you see, like the number of tabs that you see in a record. So some of the general tabs include the Roles tab. So if I click on the Roles tab as an example, you can see that this tab has been made available for all people. So we want this to show up regardless of what role a person has in the system. Oops. So I'll go back to picking tabs. And then we have the Calls Contacts role. So this is a standard tab as well for the shelter programs. It shows up, but you can add this tab to additional roles if you want to. You'll see that the All People is unticked. So it's not showing up in All People. Instead, it's showing on specific roles. So I may want to add this role to the staff. So say I want to be able to track calls contacts for staff. So I will hold down Control and click on Staff. And now this tab, once I've updated it, will show up on that role. You can also remove roles as well. So if you have tabs that you feel are cluttering your client records, you can also remove those tabs, provided they are not attached to an important part of your data entry process. So one example might be the Documents tab. So if I click on the Documents tab, this is another standard tab, an Outcome Tracker standard tab, but I may not want it to show up on all people. I may just want this tab to show up on a specific client group. So I will just choose Outreach, and then I've taken that tab away and freed up space. So I'm not going to make that change. I'm just going to leave the page. Another option that you have to customize the appearance of your site is at the top here. So choosing how tabs display in Outcome Tracker. So we have the option to show multiple rows of tabs. So that's when you would see if Tinkerbell is in a lot of programs and has a lot of data entry tabs, you may see 2 rows of tabs in her record. So that's one option. So if I hit save, I don't know if it will actually change it. Yeah, it doesn't change it. But the way I have it set up is with the 1 scrolling row of tabs. So rather than having the 2 rows, I have the option to move left to right to access the tabs that I want. And really, this is just preference. Totally up to you. Okay. So the last feature for managing tabs that may be useful to you is the option to reorder tabs. So the order that the tabs are listed in here will determine the order that they show up in your client record. So calls contacts comes before the residential intake adult in this list, and so that determines how they appear in the file. So you may want to move tabs around in terms of order. And you do this by clicking on the tab label in this list and using the up and down options to move those tabs around. Now, another important thing to note is that whatever tab is set up here at the top of the list is the default tab generally when you enter or you go into a client record and outcome tracker. So if I search for, let's say, I'll just search for all clients and open up a record. So outcome tracker will either default to the last place you were in a client record, or it will default to the first tab, so the very left tab in that client record. So this is the last place that we were in Bobby Bell's record, but if we had just created Bobby Bell or just added Bobby Bell into outcome tracker, it would default to the roles tab because that's the first tab that we've set up in the system. So this may be a tool to prompt staff to do a certain piece of data entry as soon as they've added somebody into the system. So just something to consider. Okay, so we will return to the Setup tab. So we have defined tabs here. Another common feature used in Outcome Tracker is the merge duplicate names. So often multiple staff are adding new clients to the system, so if they're taking calls, contacts, that type of thing, they may be adding the same person into the system more than once with different spellings to their names or just making a duplicate record of that person. So what we do here is merge duplicates to ensure that all of the information that we need associated with a specific person's record is stored together as opposed to in different places. So once we're in the merge duplicates function, we can adjust the sensitivity. So the sensitivity here, if I increase the sensitivity, Outcome Tracker will only find very likely matches for duplicate names, so they will have to have a certain number of matching, say date of birth will have to be matching or phone number will have to be matching for Outcome Tracker to recognize more sensitive duplicate names. If I want to lower the sensitivity, Outcome Tracker will pick up more potential duplicates. So the names may be phonetically similar, like they may sound the same, or be spelled similarly, or not be all that similar at all in the case of toddler duck and test child record. But generally, keeping the sensitivity higher will prevent you from accidentally merging two records that should not be merged together. And that is something that you want to avoid, because it can't go back. You would have to delete all the information out of that record that was associated with the other record and then re-add it all under a new person. So proceed with caution under the merge duplicate names function. Okay. So I'm going to return to the Setup tab. And move into looking at working with questions as well as drop-down lists. So I think I will work with drop-down lists first. This is another common request we get for support. So oftentimes, especially now that we've been in Outcome Tracker for 5 years, sometimes we have options that we want to add to a drop-down list because we have new information. So for instance, There may be a new region code that's added to the region list or something like that, or you may have a new program available in your shelter and you want to add that to your program name list. So this is where you're able to do that. So I'm going to search in the right here for the program name question. There we go. And if I click on program name, I have a list of all of the values that are in that drop-down list. And I have the number of times that they've been used. I have the order that they're in, and whether or not they're enabled on the list. So here I can do a few things. I can add new values. So say we now have a court support program. I can now add court support to the list, and it is available on that drop-down list on all of the forums where this question is added. I can now reorder this list. So if court support, say I want these to be in alphabetical order, I can reorder these just by clicking on them and dragging them. So we'll move court support up, move our helpline up, outreach, other, and I think that's all. Oh, there. And now we have our questions in alphabetical order. So you can manipulate the drop-down list without necessarily, you won't affect any of the data contained in this question. You may also run into the issue where a drop-down option has become obsolete. So you're no longer providing that service or that program, and you don't want to lose the data associated, like in historical records. So say the court support program was discontinued a month ago. You still want to know all of the people that were in that program 5 years ago, but you no longer want people to be able to choose that option. And that's where this enabled column comes in. So you can untick court support from being enabled, and it will no longer appear on your drop-down list. However, if you run a report for this program, you will be able to choose court support still under reports to view the old information. So I do want to add a bit of a caveat to working with the drop-downs. Part of what we do as a network is we have identified a common data set. So we have a number of questions that are indicated on your forms using form actions. So they're indicated in red. They'll have an alert that lets you know that they're either provincial reporting requirements or ACWS requested fields. And drop-down lists for these questions cannot be changed by individual shelters. All of the directors have worked together to develop the options that are on those lists, and by adding new options to the list, it compromises those questions and our ability to work with those questions as a network. So please do not make any changes to questions that are part of our data set. And if you are unsure, please contact Amy and I, and we will advise you as to whether or not making changes to those questions will affect anything happening at the network level. Okay. So we will again return to the Setup tab, and we will look at defining questions. So this is really just where you can either add a question, if you'd like to add a question, or search for questions in Outcome Tracker. So again, I was looking at occupancy-related questions, so I can search for part of that. Part of the question description, and I will get a list of all of the questions that contain that description. And I get a bit of information here as well. So I get information about the answer type, so how data is entered for that question. So these are all number fields, which means that you can only add numbers. as responses. You may have a drop-down list option here, and it will let you know, or you may have a multi-select drop-down list, and that will be indicated here as well. It also lets you know if that question exists in an activity. So as you can see, this number of unavailable beds because occupied by family question doesn't exist on any of our activities, so there's no data really associated with this question. If I click on the number of occupied beds, I get some additional information about the question. So again, here's the summary information. But I also have information about its usage, which can be quite helpful. So it tells me what activities this question has been added to, what queries and reports it exists in as well. So this is just a nice feature if you are looking for, say, a report that gives you information on the types of abuse question. It will let you know where those queries and reports exist, and you can access them. Okay. So I think we'll take a break. Again, focusing on what is used more day to day in the setup tab, you can see that there are a lot more features, and if there's anything you'd like to learn more about, please let Amy and I know via email, and we'll cover it in a later webinar. But for the time being, are there any questions about what we've covered so far? Doesn't look like it. Maybe I'll give just a minute in case anyone does want to shoot me a question before we move on, and give you guys a second to take a quick break. Hi, Sally. So I just saw your question, and I'm wondering if you can let me know whether or not you have a microphone, because I just want to clarify what you're asking before I give you a response. No microphone. Okay. So why don't I try responding, and if I'm way off, just let me know, and we'll reset. So there are two ways, I guess, to remove the edit tab from showing up in files. And I think you were thinking that you could remove it from the permissions, which is one option. So people wouldn't have that option to see it because it would be not available to them as a member of a permission group. But the other option is to actually do it through the defined tabs, which I think is a bit easier. So you won't have to remove all tabs and then re-add the tabs that you do want staff to have permission to add data to. Instead, you can just, I'll walk you through it right now. Oh, I see. So you want to be able to use it. but you don't want your staff to be able to use it. So yeah, probably the permissions group is the way you'll want to do it, and you will have to remove the all tabs option or all roles option. I'm not sure which one off the top of my head, and then re-add the ones that you do want them to be able to add data to. But we can follow up one-on-one perhaps and explore some options that work for you as well at a later time in your site. Okay. Well, thanks for your question, Sally. I appreciate it. And I think we will move on now to some data management tools. So I know for a lot of you, cleaning up your data for your reporting requirements is a big part of your roles. You do that either monthly with your Schedule D submissions or annually when Amy and I call you. And I should say, data quality has been really, really great. So we appreciate all of your hard work, and we just want to give you some options for making that bit of your work a little bit easier. So I did want to share, again, some of the tools that are available to you to, I guess, troubleshoot. So when you're running a report and data is not populating that report, either you're missing clients or women or children are just not showing up in the report. That seems to be one of the ongoing issues that we've had. So I'm just going to show you how to read the General tab. So when I'm pulling for clients served, women and children, for instance, I've added filters to the query that populates that report that place limitations on who gets included into the query. So if I go into number of women and children served, I'll just take a second to load. All of you should have access to the General tab, even in our network reports, so you won't see a lot of these other tabs because how Outcome Tracker works is basically the owners of the reports, which are ACWS in the network site, are the only ones who have the ability to manipulate reports. So if you want to manipulate a report, you have to copy it into your own site. But the General tab is available everywhere, and this General tab gives you a bit of detail about what's included in the query and how it's designed. So you can see here, these are all of the columns, and really columns are the questions from Outcome Tracker that have been pulled into the query. And then down here are the filters that are placing conditions on all of the enrollments that have this data, and only including the ones that meet the conditions that we're looking for. So for instance, because we're pulling for active clients, we only want admission dates that are less than or equal to a certain date and greater than or equal to a certain date. But if either the admission date or the discharge date are missing in a client record, well, in this case, the admission date, those people may not pull into the report because that data is missing and they can't be filtered for. Likewise, if there are any issues with the role begin dates or end dates, you may find that somebody won't pull into your report. And so when you're troubleshooting missing women or children, so people who aren't coming into the report who should be coming into the report, this filter section here will give you sort of a starting point for where to look for mistakes in their files. So again, the admission date, the role membership end date, the type of program in lists. So if the type of program isn't the type of program you're searching for, so if someone accidentally added them to an outreach program when they should have been in a shelter program, or if somebody accidentally, left that question empty, then those people will not populate into the query or the report. So I've found this really, really helpful for finding that missing data, and hopefully this will help you as well. I know this was one of the more common errors we ran into a few months ago when we were doing some troubleshooting on admissions, is that either the roll dates were a little bit off and not being captured, and so people weren't being captured in the reports, or the type of program had been entered incorrectly for those people. So another option, and this one is really helpful, but it takes a bit of practice, I have found, is using the Enrollments tab in a given activity to find data that may be entered incorrectly or missing altogether. So under the activities list, there's a list of all of the activities that we have in our site. Some of you may have more, some of you may have less, just depending on the types of programs you have and the services you offer. Sorry, I'm laughing. We have a furry friend here today at our webinar, and he's a little bit excited, so I'm sorry if you're hearing dog noises in the background. But anyway, so I'm going to go into the admission intake form here. So the admission intake form is where we have all of the intake and discharge information for all of our common programs. So we have for all of our emergency residential programs, our second stage residential programs, and our outreach follow-up programs. We have designed, because they all use the same questions, they are all stored in the same activity. And so I don't know if this is too much information, but I'll share that the activity is actually where all of the data gets stored in Outcome Tracker. So we have tabs in client records that allow you to enter data for that specific person, but ultimately the data is going into the activity. So if I go to the Enrollments tab, I see a list of everyone who we have data associated with the intake and admission form, all listed here in the enrollments. And so the great thing about this tab here is that you can sort and filter all of your enrollments in the activity. So for instance, if I want to search for all of the enrollments in alphabetical order, if I click on the enrollee name and I get the right side up triangle, I'm looking at all of our enrollments in alphabetical order. If I want to look at them in reverse alphabetical order, I just have to click on it again. I will see an upside down triangle, and now I'm seeing them in reverse order. If I want to see them in order of admission, what I actually first have to do, so I'm getting ahead of myself, is choose the admission date question from this list. So I guess what I'll do is back up, is all of the questions here are questions that are in the admission and intake form activity. So we have all of the questions that are on the admission form. For instance, emergency contact. We have the admission date, which I've already selected. We have type of client, so we can click on that. We can click on any of these questions, and if I hit go, sorry, it's just taking a second to load. There we go. So I now can view the type of client question here, almost like in a spreadsheet format. So I see per client, I see which admission date is associated with data for that question. And yeah, it's a great way to review data and also find data that might be missing. So for instance, I might want to in addition to sorting here, which I've done, so right now I'm reviewing all of the enrollments by admission date in chronological order. If I also want to filter for data that might be missing, I have the option here to filter. And there's a little information piece, so click on the recycle button to enable specific filters. So if I want to filter, for instance, on the type of program question, which is here, I can click here, and now I can look for where that question might be missing. So I have the condition here, so equals none. So this is what I would do if I was looking for enrollments who are missing data for that question. So we'll hit filter. And now you can see that I have 2 enrollees in the admission intake form who don't have an answer for the type of program. And what's nice is I can actually add data to this question if I need to. Rather than having to go to people organizations, search for them, go into their file and add it, and then hit save, I can just add it here and click update. So come year end, we're reviewing annual stats, and you receive an email that says, you have 100 women admitted, but you have 110, and you need to do that cleanup in order for those women to appear in the reports. You can do this rather quickly using the enrollments tab. So that's one option available to you. So now I want to clear the filter so that I can review all of my enrollments again, and what I'll do is just clear the filters and show all enrollments. And now I'm looking at everyone again. So you can also click on the enrollee name to look at the full activity, so all of the data in one place. So all of these questions here, or all of the questions in the admission intake form activity. So these include the admission and discharge questions. Now we've created separate forms and data entry tabs for the questions associated with the intake and the questions associated with the discharge, but they're all linked together in one activity, so you can review all of that information here. So again, it's a second option for you for reviewing data. And the last thing I'll do is just show you some of the other filter options. So we were looking at a drop-down with this question. So you only have so many filter options, but you also have the options to search, by dates. So if you want to search for a specific date, you can choose that date. If you want to search for a greater than or equal to, that's what this sign means. That means it'll show you all of the admissions. So say you're reviewing June's data, you can enter, say, greater than or equal to June 1st into here, and you can filter for all of those records, and then you'll be reviewing all of the last month's enrollments in that activity in one place. So it takes a bit of practice to get comfortable in here, but if you are doing larger data management projects, it's a really, really great option for you. And I hope you'll contact us to learn more about it if you need to, because this is probably, when I worked at the YWCA, this was a real time saver for me. Okay, so that's really the basics of some of the data cleanup tools, some of the quick fixes that you may not have known about. At this point, are there any questions about using either of these for data management? So referring to the general tab on the reports to find a bit more information about why somebody might not be showing up versus using the enrollments tab to filter and sort. Cool. Okay, well, I'll carry on, and then if any questions do pop up, we can stop and touch on them. Oh, Amy just wants me to remind you that you can send a question anytime. Don't feel you have to wait for when I solicit questions. You can just send them and we'll hold on to them until there's a good time to discuss them, or if it's really relevant, we can stop and review them together. So just feel free to send anything our way. Okay, so now we are going to look at queries and reports. So I'm going to go to the Reports tab. I actually have some reports open here, so why don't I go here? Okay, so I'll just give you an overview of the reports that are available to you and share a bit of background information. So the ACWS network shared network reports are the reports that we produce in our site that are available to all of our members, and as long as you're pulling for our common activities, so our residential intake and discharge and that type of thing, or our case notes or calls contacts, as long as you're pulling data for those general activities, these reports should work and meet most of your reporting needs. So along the left here is sort of the inventory of all of the report folders in Outcome Trackers. So if I click on the shared network reports, it will expand to show you all of the folders we have for reports, but then there are also a lot of reports that are just stored in here for you, and you can see Susan has been very busy over the years building reports for everybody. But what we do generally, like we will have the annual stats folder, so that there are very specific reports you will use for pulling your annual stats with us, or there may be some that are only pertinent to your shelter type, like reports for second stage. And so those have all been customized to meet very specific reporting needs for a group or a purpose. So you have the option. Again, you can't make changes to reports in the network site when they are in the network site, but what you can do is copy reports into your own folders and work with them there. Then you have the option to make any changes. So for instance, if I take the DVSA report here, I just tick in the box to the left of it, scroll all the way down, and select copy or move. And you will probably only have the option to copy. So you can choose what folder you put it in. So you may want to, oops, sorry. I think I accidentally copied it already. Let's try that again. Hopefully I'm not frozen. Okay, let's try that one more time. So if I choose the DVSA report, I select copy or move. I can select the destination folder. So I can either move it into, you will have your shelter name folder available to you here, so you can move it into your general shelter folder, or you can move it into your personal folder. I recommend working with reports in your personal folder until they're ready, until they've been vetted and you've updated everything you need to update before you move it into shared folders, just so that nobody's accidentally working with a report that's not quite pulling what it should be pulling. So I'm going to copy this into my personal folder. Okay, so here it is. So you can see my folder is a bit of a mess, but you can find reports that you have, reports or queries you've created recently by selecting the date it was modified here, by sorting, sorry, by the date of it was modified. So now I've got it sorted so that the most recent are on the top, and I can choose the DVSA report. And maybe I'll just cancel that because this is going to take a long time to run. So for today's purposes, I was thinking it made the most sense to show you how to modify an existing report to pull what you need for it, what you need it to pull. So I've created a folder called Report Templates, and this is in the ACWS network folder. And this is just basically a very bare bones activity report. So it's pulling kind of the bare minimum of what we would expect to need. So I guess to lead into this, if you are copying and modifying reports, it's important to understand first and foremost when selecting your report to copy or modify. So we will use this one as a template, but you may want to work from an existing report in the folder. But you want to be very clear about what group you are trying to pull information for. So we generally have, when it comes to pulling information from admissions and discharges, we have 3 groups that we look at. We have groups that were admitted within a specific date range. So those are groups who have an admission date that falls between 2 dates. So for your monthlies, it'll be anyone who was admitted in the month of June. We have groups that are discharged, and kind of the reverse, just anyone who has a discharge date on their admission intake form that falls within those 2 dates. Again, for the month of June, anyone discharged in the month of June. And then we have active clients. So active clients are anybody who entered your shelter before a given date, but were still there. So say in the month of June, we would be talking about a woman who came on May 25th and left on June 10th. So she was active in the month of June, but she wasn't admitted in the month of June. Or we may be talking about somebody who entered during the month and may still be there after the end of the month. So somebody entered your shelter on June 15th and left on July 2nd. So if we were looking for clients active in the month of June, we would want to know that our report was including all of those people. And generally that's indicated in the titles of our reports. So we have active clients within a date range, which tells you that that will pull for active clients, or we may have women admitted in a report or query title. So we've got clients admitted here, or clients discharged here. So just be mindful that you're choosing a report that's pulling for that client group, because generally we're looking for counts of things. We want to make sure that the count is just counting the right group of people. So I'm going to go back to this template here. So I'm pulling for an activity. So this could be anything really other than the admission and discharge forms. So this would apply to case notes. It would apply to surveys that we have. So we have the danger assessment and DVSA, where we have the parenting stress index. So this would be something that would pull questions from any of those activities, because it's designed with the standard pieces of those activities already filtered, and then you have the option to just add any questions to the query that you would want to pull from those specific activities. So once I'm in a query, the first thing I do is go to the columns. So the columns are really the questions that are found on forms, and when they're pulled into a query, they become the columns of the query, so they'll all be lined up along the top. So it's just an interchangeable word for questions. We have the option to add questions here. So all the questions in Outcome Tracker are organized into column groups, just to make it maybe easier, maybe harder to find them, depending on how you look at it. So they're grouped around, I guess, what they might be attached to. So for instance, we have For us, we have agency questions, and these are all questions that are attached to the agency profile associated with each of your sites. So you won't see agency there. We have relationship questions, so these are all questions that are associated with relationships in Outcome Tracker. And now you have two options here. So once we've selected the column group, we do get a list of available columns. So these are all of the columns that are available under, let's say, relationships here. So let's choose all relationships. But you'll notice at the bottom that there's two options. There's the show common, so the most frequently used columns from that column group. And then there's the show all. And so maybe that's not the best example. It doesn't seem to be showing more, but let's try with demographics. So if I show common, I get a much shorter list of options, the more frequently used columns. But if I show all, I will see an expanded list. So if you are looking for something that may not be used as frequently, do keep in mind that you are showing all of the questions that are available for that column group rather than just the common ones. So under demographics here, these are all questions that are associated with a woman or child's record. So they are questions, for instance, like their name. You only really have to add a name to a client record once, and it will appear on all of their forms because it's a system question. So these are questions that are more associated with an individual than with a specific activity. So in contrast, say with the danger assessment, the questions on that activity are unique to that activity and can be answered more than once or may change every time they're answered, whereas these are questions that would tend to remain the same. They may change, but they tend to be just attached to that person as sort of their demographic or identifiers, their background questions. So there we have name fields, we have address fields. We have contact fields. So again, you know, phone numbers, addresses, that type of thing. Other fields and notes is where you'll find birth date. That's really the big one in here. Gender as well will be listed in here. A lot of these are questions that we don't use, but are just designed generally into Outcome Tracker. So we have role questions. So role membership begin and end date, or whether or not someone is active in your system. We have any profiles, so the abuser profile questions will be found here. The staff profile questions will be found here. But otherwise, everything else will be found under enrollments. So enrollments, again, is where you will find all of the questions that are what they call user-defined fields. So questions that either we have created or you have created to appear on a particular activity, and that can change every time they're answered. So there are, let's just see, under all enrollments, there are the enrollment details. So the enrollment details are the characteristics of the activity. So you'll find here the enrollment begin date. So this is the date, for instance, on the DVSA that you would enter as the date that that DVSA was completed. So this is a useful question to include. You'll find the enrollment activity description, which is the name of the activity. So when you're designing a query, the more specific you can be, the faster it will run. So if you want to pull questions that are specific to the danger assessment, if you include a filter that searches only for danger assessment enrollments, then your query will run much more efficiently. So that is the benefit of including questions from the enrollment details. It's also important that if you may have a question that's answered. So I'm thinking of, say, types of abuse experienced. That question could appear on multiple activities, and it may be answered differently on different activities depending on perhaps the context it's being asked in. And so if there's the potential that someone has answered a question more than once and the answers are different, you'll want to be specific about where you want to pull the response to that question from. And so that's the other benefit of including the enrollment activity description. So I would include this so that I can later add a filter to my query, selecting a very specific activity to pull data from. And those are really the big ones. The other important one is the enrollment ID. So you all know that in Outcome Tracker, each woman and child that's added into the system and each staff person, basically all the records in Outcome Tracker have a unique system ID. So this is an identifier that I think it's like a 10-digit number that is associated with that individual and only that individual. So similarly, each enrollment, so every time you complete an intake form, for instance, for a woman or child, an enrollment ID is created for that record. And this one is really helpful if you want to pull in, if you want to look at multiple enrollments for a person. So say we may have one report where we want to look at all of the individuals in our site. And in that case, we would want to look at it, say, by client name or by client ID number and get a sense of maybe the number of unique women that have ever used our shelter. But if we want to look at the number of admissions to our shelter and we want to count multiple admissions for a woman, then we would want to include this enrollment ID option because it will then allow us to look at those unique admissions by a unique identifier rather than by another question in the system. So anyway, I think this will make more sense if it's not making sense when we get into creating filters. And then we have questions. So again, we're under the enrollments column group, but there's a bit of a breakdown here. And in here we have just hundreds of questions in alphabetical order, all of the questions we ask in our site. So you'll want to know what questions you're looking for when reviewing this list and building a query. This is one way to find questions. Another way to find questions is to look for the questions that are specific to an activity. So let's say I want to only look for danger assessment questions. I can, rather than look at the questions show all, look at the questions show by activity, select repeatable activities, and repeatable activities are the majority of activities in our sites. And repeatable just means that they can be, like each person could have as many calls contacts as you wanted to create. They're repeatable. Whereas if they weren't repeatable, you would only ever be able to create one for an individual. So I'm going to look for our danger assessment in DVSA. And if I click on the danger assessment in DVSA, then I get a look at the questions that are only found on that activity. So it's much simpler to then select questions, and I can choose maybe just a few. Let's get the total score in here. So I can get just a few questions selected. I will choose this arrow here to move them over. If you make a mistake and add a question you don't actually want to look at, you can just arrow it back. If you want to start from scratch and take them all away, you can choose this double arrow option and then they'll all just disappear. But we will choose just this random sampling of questions and carry on. We'll hit finish. So now I've got a few more questions pulled in to my query. And what I'm going to do next is look at the sort tab. I may want to review this information in a certain order. So the default sorting option here is that it will look at the names for all of the enrollees in ascending order, so in alphabetical order. But I may want to look at them based on when they were filled out. And so what I could do is add an enrollment begin date, choose add, and then it prioritizes them for me. So it's sort of like a two-level sorting function now. So I've got, first I'll sort by the enrollment begin date, so in chronological order. But if I've got two on the same day, then I'll get them in alphabetical order. So, and you can sort by as many. You may want to sort by score. So we may want to look at the total score instead. And you can add just as many as you want. If I want to look at, say, highest score to lowest score, if I click on ascending here, it will change it to descending and reverse the order for the total score. So rather than smallest to largest, we're now looking at it largest to smallest. Okay, so now we will go to the filter tab. And I've set up some default filters. These will look familiar because these are kind of our defaults for all of our reports in Outcome Tracker and all of our queries generally. So we have the type of program question, which may or may not actually, I'm not sure if this question is found on the DA, so we may have to remove this filter at some point. But for the time being, we've got our type of program question, our role, and our date filters. And so what we've done here is we've created filters, but we've created them as prompted fields. And what that means is that if I were to just create these as a filter, like I have down below, so for instance, if the word prompt doesn't appear next to it, next to the values, you'll just see, like we could have created, for instance, the enrollment begin date, and we could just set a date and not allow people the option to customize it every time they run the report. But because we've created a prompt, we're allowing these values to be customized every time somebody wants to use this report, so it becomes very flexible. Whereas you may have noticed with the new annual stats reports, we did a lot of the filters behind the scenes, which means that the reports are very inflexible. They're for a very specific purpose. But when you add prompts, you kind of allow your staff or your managers or anyone to use the report as they need to run it. So either for a shorter amount of time or for a larger period of time, or for different program groups and that type of thing, or different roles. So that's something to keep in mind when you're designing your reports. So the way I've set this up here is that, so you'll see the enrollment activity description filter is the first filter. And I've set it up so that there's a list that appears that will allow you to choose. So it allows us to choose the danger assessment now. So it's serving as a bit of a template that way. So if you were to copy this particular activity query report template, you can then choose to customize it for whatever activity you want to customize it. So in this case, I think we should look at the danger assessment in DVSA. So I think it's helpful that we go through the process of building some filters. This is another part of working in Outcome Tracker that really just takes a lot of time and practice, and we do have a lot of reports available to use, so we do encourage you to use those reports, but really building queries and reports just, I think, just takes time, and there are a lot of filtering options to be covered that we probably won't get to today. So if you do decide to tackle some queries and reports, please contact us, and we can get into some of the specifics for your particular report or query, rather than covering everything here. So let's work with a few different question types so that you can see some of the different filters that are available to you depending on the question type. So let's look at role. So actually, let's look at the total score. So the total score for the DVSA is a number field, and so we have numeric and the comparison options here. We have numeric options, so we can choose things like equals, so we could filter for a specific score if we wanted to. We could filter for a score that is less than or equal to something. So say we wanted to look for all of our low to moderate risk. I can't remember the language off the top of my head, but say low to moderate risk women, we could look for anyone who had a score below a certain number and pull for all of those people. If we wanted to look for severe risk, we could pull for greater than or equal to. And then that would give us all of the enrollments in the DVSA that were above a certain number or equal to that number. Or we could search for anyone who is missing the DVSA score, so that's an option too. If we wanted to create more of like an auditing report or query, we could start searching for data that was missing from particular fields as well. And the same applies to dates, really. So if I choose the enrollment begin date, and I have the same options here because, again, it's sort of functioning like a number. We have equals, not equal, which isn't super relevant, but we could look for all of them completed on a specific day. And we could also create a prompt that would allow us to look to customize that date. So if I wanted to do that, so say I wanted to have a report that would pull for danger assessments completed, maybe as part of a group that's run on a certain date. So I could create this report, and what I would do is create a new prompted field here. I would label this, so under the description, I have the option to customize how I want to describe the prompt to help people fill it out properly. So I could call this the date of session. I can choose a default date, so say the session runs on the first day of every month. I could choose to run it for the first day of the current month or the first day of the last month, depending if there was maybe there's a schedule to when you want to review this information. So you can kind of save people the time of having to enter the date by setting a default value, like the last day of last quarter, that type of thing. So that's an option, or I can just enter, this one. I can just enter a date that I want to have as the default value. So people still have the option to customize the date that's there, but there's also a default in there because maybe it's the most common answer. So yeah, there's a few options there. Oops, let's cancel. Okay. So I think what I'll do, oh, that did show up. Maybe we should get rid of that. Interesting. I'm just going to resend this to see if we can get rid of that date of session. No, it's still there. That's interesting. Okay. Outcome Tracker's having a moment, I think, because that filter isn't showing up in my list of filters, but it is showing up in my prompts. No, I just built it now, so I don't know. Anyway, that's okay. We'll move on. So next is the Summarize tab. So this is, again, if you're copying and modifying existing queries, a lot of this stuff will already be handled for you, but I think it's helpful to know kind of how the query is working when you are looking at it or trying to troubleshoot if something kind of funny is happening in your system. So the summarization tab is the tab in the query that kind of decides how you want to group, like what will make up the rows in your query. So often we're looking at, maybe we want to look at rows by unique woman, as I was mentioning before, and if that's the case, what we want to do is select group and summarize, and then choose, their full name and group by the full name. And that will give us one row for each unique woman enrolled in the danger assessment. But if we want to pull for each unique survey that's been completed, rather than, so one woman may have 4 surveys attached to her name, so we would want to group then by that enrollment ID question that I mentioned earlier. And so that'll give us a different count of surveys because we're looking at the surveys in a different way. So I will go ahead and hit update. And now I'd be looking at probably a few, I'd get a few more surveys in this list, provided that you were pulling and there was a woman who came to your shelter more than once or completed the danger assessment for more than one program. Now, say I do want to look at each unique woman, but I only want to look at the survey, say that she completed most recently. That's where we start looking at the summarization. So here we were looking at grouping, here we're looking at the summarization. So I may go down to her total score option here and choose something like last entered value. And I may do the same for her total score questionnaire, So her last entered value. So this gives me also a different number than I would get if I were looking at the unique list. So let's look at, I'm just going to right click and open the results to this query. So let's go back to January 2010 and we will choose the residential roles. And I don't know if the type of program question has been answered for that, so what I'm going to do is just, I need to get rid of this filter if this is going to work. Sorry everybody, I'm having an outcome tracker. Outcome tracker's having a moment and I don't know. I might have to do this example in a different query because I'm concerned that this filters here even though it doesn't seem to exist down here. So bear with me for just a second. I'm going to go into our reports. And what I've done is I've created some copies. Of these reports. So let's look at where would we get a good number? Let's go here. So I'm going to go into the query that's associated with this report. And we'll go to results. So again, I'm just going to open up the summarization tab in another tab so that I can show you how playing with the summarization will affect what you see in your query. So you can see right now we're grouped by a lot of extra things, and I'm just going to take these away and hit update. Okay, so now we're grouping just by the first name or the full name and the system ID. And these are the results that we get when we choose emergency residential, residential admission, or the residential adult and child. And let's do the same. We'll go back to 2010 and pull our results. Okay, so I get 8 results. So I've got 8 unique people pulled into this query. Now I'm going back to this tab, the summarization tab here, and now I'm going to pull, as an example, now I'm going to pull by admission date as well. So I'm going to group by their admission dates as well as their names, and we're going to just have a look at how that affects our numbers. So what this is doing is creating a row for each woman, but then if that woman has more than one admission date, it's going to create an additional row. So her name will appear twice if she has 2 admission dates as well. And we'll run this again. So now I have 9 rows. So we had one person, Betty Brownlee, who has more than one admission date. So we've got March 26th, March 27th. So now let's look at some of what we're pulling in here. So we have all of these values here. So we have, this is actually the province, this is the region. And we're going to focus specifically on Betty Brownlee because we've got 2 enrollments for her. So if I go back to the summarization tab, I'm going to go back to just grouping by unique individuals. And then instead of looking at a unique list, well, let's update this. We'll run it again. And you'll see that the unique list option, when it's applied to a question that has more than one answer, so if we go down to Betty Brownlee, you'll see that we get 2 comma-separated dates that reflect the fact that she has 2 admission dates for 2 different enrollments in the activity. If I go back to the summarization tab and I change the admission date to the last entered value, so I only want to look at the most recent entry into the admission intake form, and I rerun this response, or this query. We'll now see for Betty Brown, did I hit update? Probably not. Let's try that again. Always hit update, everyone. Okay. Oh, the admission date here. I see. That's the discharge date. I wasn't reading carefully enough. So let's change the discharge date to last entered value. We'll hit update. Bear with me here, sorry. Okay, so now I'm back in the query on the results tab, and I'll run this again, and hopefully things will work now. So let's look. Discharge date, Betty Brownlee. So now we're seeing only one date appears, and it's the date that was entered onto that form most recently. So you have all sorts of options. So I've just shown you one. So there's also the first entered value. So if you want to look at maybe the first, so per woman, the first piece of data that was entered for that question for her, then you can choose the first entered value. If you want a count of how many times that question has been answered, so maybe we want to know how many times she has been discharged from our program, we could choose a count of, say, unique values or a count of values to get a count of the discharge dates in that activity for that person. So there are a lot of interesting summarization options if you are wanting to use Outcome Tracker to produce queries. They give you lists of information. Okay. So again, there's a bit of a workflow here, and we're focused mostly on copying and modifying reports, but I'll just remind you that please be mindful of the client group that you would like to copy a query or report from. Identify that query or report. Let's go to the reports page. So identify that query or report, copy or move it to your personal folder in your own site, and feel free to add questions using the columns tab, which is here. Add any questions from that activity you'd like, being mindful of where that question is stored in the various column groups. You can then manipulate how that information is sorted into the query, so how you want to review it, in what order. To work with the filters to be either more specific or less specific about how you want to, what conditions you want to place on who gets included into your query. And then review the summarization and grouping of that query so that you're getting the right number of rows of data for the group you want to look at, and you're seeing each of the values answered for the questions as you'd like to see them. So if you're looking for unique lists or only one value per person or counts of things, that type of thing. Okay. All right, so I think now we will go through very simply. Sorry, 1 second. Okay. All right, so now I think that we will build a report, and I will take you through the different features of a report and what your options are to take information that you've already pulled into a query. So you've taken the spreadsheet you've designed in your modified query and turning it into a report so that you can analyze the information. So again, this happens under the Reports tab. You'll see at the top here under Tasks, so there is the option to add a new query, but again, depending on what you're looking for, there's probably something that already exists in the network site for you. Then there's the option to add a new report and also to add a new folder, and that's really just, you have the option to create a folder to store your reports if you want to keep them more organized than I keep my own. Okay, so we will add a new report. And I always find this more challenging. And it is finding a way to name the report and to be as clear as possible, so it's very explicit what you're using the report to do. So I think we should work with the danger assessment again. So danger assessment. Actually, I'm going to, well, yeah, let's do that. Danger assessment total score. So you can add some details. So we can say DA scores completed within a date range. So I've titled it, I've described it, I'm creating a crosstab report, and then I can decide where I want to store that report. So again, I recommend starting in your personal folder until you've got the report exactly as you'd like it to be and it's ready to share with others, because once it's moved into your agency report folder, it's available for everyone to use. So, okay. So when we build reports, we can actually build pretty complex reports in Outcome Tracker that have multiple sections to them. So if that's the case, you may want to give this a particular title and it'll just be like a subheader on the report itself. But in this case, I think we're just going to create one report. So it's still a crosstab report, and I don't feel that we need to give it a module title. So I'm just going to skip through this step. And now I need to select the query that I would like to pull data from. So this is sort of a link to what you would see under the Reports tab, and I can navigate it just as I would the Reports tab in Outcome Tracker. So I'm looking for a danger assessment query. And I found here, I've got two. I've got danger assessment calendar details, danger assessment survey details. And this is where that labeling of queries and reports is very important. Also using folders to organize your reports, because you want to ensure that you're attaching the right query, the query that you want, into this report. So I'm going to choose danger assessment survey details. And I'll click next. And now I have a list of all of those columns or questions that we added to our query, or that exist in this particular query, because this is a different query than we were working on initially. So these are all the questions basically that are available on the danger assessment activity. So the horizontal headers are the headers that will form the columns of our report. So if I want to look at, say I want to see how danger assessment responses vary by role, I could click on role, and then depending on the roles I select, I may get a count of answers for each vertical header that I add later. So say I have residential women who responded, I'll have a column for residential women. If I have women who were from the outreach program, I'll get a column for women from the outreach program, and so on. So generally, I would say use either the name or the system name ID, and then what that will do is just give you a count per person of their responses. So. And then my vertical headers are all of the questions from the survey that will form rows in the report that I want to analyze. So maybe I want to see, counts of total score and maybe just trying to think, is your partner unemployed? So let's choose both of those questions, and then we'll hit next. So here is just a summary of all of the headers that you've selected. You have the option to go back if you've made a mistake, and otherwise we can just select finish and start looking at our report in a bit more detail. No, it's okay. Okay, so now we're in the Edit tab of our report. So we see, as I mentioned before, and it's probably more clear now that you can actually see it. So I chose the name as my horizontal header, so that's here. And you see that that creates one column for me along the top, and all of the options here along the bottom. And then all of the horizontal headers, so I chose, is your partner unemployed, is one horizontal header. All of the response choices there are displayed. And then I have the total score for the questionnaire. And again, all of the responses are displayed here. So we do have the option to manipulate this a little bit. So it could be that depending on what we want to do with this report, say we just want to know the total number of times that this report was answered. We would want to click on the heading of that question. Not this report was answered, this question was answered. So say, is your partner unemployed? If I want to know how many times this was answered, I would click on the question, and then I have the option to start editing this category a little bit. So down here, I have all of the options for I guess, breaking down that question into different ways of analyzing it. So the ones that we're showing now are looking at all of the data values, so all of the response choices that are in that drop-down. and the total. So I'm getting just a total number of enrollments in that question. So you'll notice on the right, so I'm happy with these choices generally because I think that gives us the information we're looking for. We really want to know just that total, how many times has this been answered. But what we want to do is play with the options for how to count that total, because if we're just looking for how many times this question was answered versus how many times the survey was filled out, those are two different things. With the danger assessment, it could be that this particular question, maybe it wasn't answered for a number of people. And so we have the option here, if that's the case, to ignore nulls. So on any survey where not all questions are answered, you'll want to be mindful of this option for ignoring nulls, because if we do want just a count of how many times the question was answered, we can change this ignore nulls to yes. And now it's going to give me only the yes or no values that were filled out for the question, as opposed to all of the yeses, all of the nos, and all of the nones that were included in the initial pulling of the data for this report. So we have other options as well. We may want to group values. So if I were to add group to this values, what I can do is choose that maybe I want to group yes and none together and label this particular group. So I could give this a title. Or I could choose, maybe let's do the yes and no's, and I could label this completed question and hit update. Yeah, and so there are other options as well. Really, those are the ones that we work with the most. There's the range option, which I think we'll look at with the next question. So I think I'm done in here. This will result in a messy results tab, but I think you get the idea that I'm just showing you some of the ways that you can work with this data. Okay. And actually, let's go back into this question for just a moment. So before I move on to looking at ranges, I just want to show you, so we've worked with the categories for this header. So we've said, okay, we want to see the total, but we also want to see counts, or some analysis of all of the data values associated with this question, and we want to look at groupings in this question. If I go to properties, I can change the label of the question as it appears in the report if I want. So this is another way to customize appearances. You could be using a question that's not directly related to the response choices to, do something else. So you might use, for instance, you might use the full name, last name, the full name question to give you a total count of the number of women that stayed in your shelter. So rather than leaving the question label to be, full name, you could change it to be count of unique women, for instance. So this is where you would customize those labels if you wanted to. I'm just going to leave this page. And lastly, you can play with the order of all of the breakdowns for that question that you want. So it makes sense to have the total towards the bottom, so I'm just going to move that total down. And then all of the other values can remain where they are, but you can reorder things here, which is helps people with reading the report effectively. Okay, so I'll hit update. And close. And it'll take a second to refresh, but now you see all of our changes here. So now our total's at the bottom, our other values are up towards the top, and our completed question group is right in the middle. So now let's look at the total score for the questionnaire. So I'm doing the same thing. I'm opening up the heading category. I'm first going to look at how I want to create my categories to analyze in Outcome Tracker. So again, the default is generally all of the data values, but I don't think I want to look at all of the data values, so I'm going to tick on the box to the left here and just hit delete. And now I'm going to look instead at ranges. So because the total score question is a number, I can look at ranges for the responses to that question. So I think the score of the survey goes up to 32 and is kind of categorized in like 8 groups of 8. So I'm going to create a 1 to 8 category. And I'm going to call this, let's say, we'll call this group 1. And I will hit update. And let's create maybe a range, a second range, so I can create as many ranges as I'd like. My second range will be all scores above 9, or maybe all respondents with scores above 9. And so I'll put 9 here, and I can put, I believe the highest score is 32, but just to be safe, maybe I'll put 100, and so this will give us a score for everyone above 9. Okay, and you can see here we likely have to reorder these categories just to make our report a bit easier to read. So I'm going to go to the reorder. I will move the total down to the bottom and click update. We'll hit close. Okay, so now instead of having all of the individual scores listed here in a very, very long list, I've got my 2 groups broken down. Okay. So the next thing that we'll look at is editing the cell. So right now it's set, it says here in brackets, it's going to give us just a count. So every time someone answered no, it's going to give us a count of people who answered no. And every time someone answered yes, we'll get a count. But there are a lot of ways that we could look at how the surveys were answered. So again, we have the drop down at the bottom and the option to add. So we can add as many ways of looking at this as we'd like to. So we have the average. So we might want to know the average. Well, I guess that one doesn't really apply here, but say we want to look at the percent of the column. So the percent of the column will tell us how many, what proportion of this count of people answered no or yes or had a none. So the label is a bit confusing for this one, but this really, if you look at your vertical or your horizontal header, it's going to give you the percent for that group who answered who chose each of the values for that particular question. There's also the percent of the total, which is a little bit different. So if you were to have multiple headers, so remember when we were talking about if we were to have chosen roles here and we had more than one column happening here, and then we had a total to the right, it would give you like what percentage of the total did this particular group, so say residential women, what percentage of the total answered no. But let's just do the column here. We'll hit update. Oops. You have to hit add before you hit update, sorry. We'll hit add. And we'll hit close. And let's do the same for the total score. So I'm going to choose again the percent of the column, hit add, and then, oops, sorry, my GoToMeeting window is getting in the way. We'll hit close. Okay. So now let's just take a look at our results. So we'll go to the View tab here. Okay. So now we've got our analysis in front of us. So we have all of our no's. So we've got the count here. So this is for the period between May 1st and today's date. We have it for our residential and adults and children. And we have all of our no's, all of our yeses, the percentages, and the percentage of respondents who scored above 9 and who fell into our group 1 categories. So yeah. And what you see here just at the top, so all of the prompts that were designed into the query will automatically appear for your report. So if you want to change any of these filters, what you can do is go to your Queries tab here, and it will give you, it'll allow you to link directly into the query. Okay. So again, those are the basics of working with reports and fiddling with how the actual data, the data is being analyzed. If you have anything more complex, again, Amy and I are more than happy to work with you on specific reporting projects. And I'll just remind you of the workflow again, that we ask that you create a copy of the report. So if you go to the Reports tab, identify the report or query if you are working from an existing one, and copy it into your personal folder and work with it from there. Or if you are creating a new report from an existing query, which has to be created first, you will add a new report here and go through the steps that we just covered. So again, I will take a quick break. That was a bit of a longer module. Are there any questions about queries and reports? Do you feel that anything was missed in terms of the basics? Just feel free to shoot us a question. We can take, I think, a 5-minute break might be appreciated. What do you guys think? A break sounds good. Agreed. Okay, so let's take 5 minutes. Why don't we come back at, I have 7 minutes after, but we'll take a few minutes, take 5-ish minutes, and then feel free to send questions during that time, and then we can address any of them once we're all back, and yeah, we'll get started in about 5. Okay, enjoy your break. Okay, so that was a bit more than 5 minutes, but I thought might as well make it a round number. So it's 11:15 now. So the last module we're going to go through is a bit of a refresher around your reporting to human services. So this is the time where if any of you don't feel this is relevant to you, or you don't report to human services on a monthly basis, please feel free to, I guess you won't really say goodbye, but that we will connect with you another time. And if you wouldn't mind, as you're leaving, to just take a moment to fill out the evaluation form for our session today, if you do decide to check out now. So otherwise, let's dive right in. So we do have a lot of new OT administrators who are participating today, so we are going to just explain the HS reporting process a little bit for their sake, review some of the requirements for your human services reporting, review the processes that we've sort of put in place for the time being for you to check for errors. And then, we've identified a few data entry errors that seem to be more common than others. And so we wanted to just point out some of those so that when you are doing your troubleshooting, you have a few places, a few jumping off points that might make it a bit easier for you. So let's get back into Outcome Tracker. Oops. Uh-oh. There. Okay. So, to start, so as OT administrators, I do believe a lot of you are the ones who are reviewing your monthly data before and also submitting it to human services. And I just wanted to remind everybody that the agreement that that the network, so all of the directors who have contracts, or all the shelters who have contracts with human services, that the agreement is that all data will be checked for errors before it is submitted to the province on the 10th day of every month. So not the 10th business day, but the 10th day of the month. So just a friendly reminder about that. So again, on all of your forms, so let's go into people organizations and look at some of the forms that are associated with the data that you submit to the province. So I'm going to go into Betty Boop. So we have the calls contacts. So some of the required data elements are found on the calls contacts form. Unless something has happened in your site, most of these or all of these fields are indicated, or all these questions are indicated by a provincial reporting requirement and a warning alert below the question. So these are questions that have to be responded to the best of your ability. I think we all recognize that sometimes not all questions are answered, but if there is data missing in these questions, this will read as an error in your human services report as it's interpreted by the people at human services. So we require the type of program, and this is required because this helps us filter for the enrollments in the call contact that we want to submit to human services. We also report the gender of contact to human services. ACWS, as part of their annual stats, likes to document the length of call, contact in minutes. With human services, we do require the type of request. So everything except for client-related calls are reported to human services as part of your calls contacts. Now, depending on what you choose for type of request, there are questions that follow. So including if this is an admission request, whether or not it was admitted, and then if it's not admitted, what reasons there are for, so unable to accommodate due to capacity. So there's kind of a sequence of questions that follow this question. And again, number of dependent children. So again, everything here will be alerted for you by red text and either the priority fields or the provincial reporting requirement alert. So we will leave this page. The other questions will be found on either the residential, adult, and child forms. And again, you'll have an alert to those questions, or your outreach follow-up forms that are associated with any outreach follow-up programs that are receiving, that you report on, basically. So anyway, I won't review all of the questions. I think most of you are quite comfortable, but just a reminder to please check that all these questions have been answered appropriately. So again, you'll see all of the alerts. Okay, so the other part of our reporting, so shelters right now are reporting on occupancy in two formats. So we are developing the occupancy tracking in Outcome Tracker, but Human Services has also requested that you track it with your dailies, and so please continue to track your occupancy with your dailies, but also complete occupancy in Outcome Tracker so that we can eventually, I think, move on to Outcome Tracker and only have one reporting format. So occupancy is stored on your shelter name organization in Outcome Tracker. So if I were to type in ACWS in my own site, this is where I would find the occupancy activity, where I would document occupancy. Now, if you would type in your own shelter name here to do the same, to document your occupancy. And it should appear as a tab in that record associated with your organization. And again, everything that's required has been highlighted here in red. But there's been a bit of confusion around occupancy, so I just want to take a moment to explain what we are trying to capture with occupancy. So the number of occupied beds, this number is the number basically of people staying in your shelter. So while it's number of occupied beds, we are actually trying to capture just the number, as you would report in your dailies, just the number of people that are staying in your shelter at that point in time. The number of unavailable beds, this is the number of beds that that are not occupied by a person, so you don't have anyone staying in that bed, but it's not available for someone to stay in because of a number of reasons. So maybe it's in repair, maybe it's being held for someone, maybe another family is staying in the room, and so that particular bed isn't available to put somebody new in, even though technically there's nobody staying in there. And that is an option that is going to be added to the list of reasons that beds are unavailable. But for the time being, we ask that you use the other reason that beds are not available for that particular case. So I'll just clarify that if a bed is not available because it is in a room where another family is staying, please use the other reason that beds are not available for the time being. And you will be updated on changes to that drop-down list that will make it easier for you to document that reason. Okay. Yeah. Oh yeah, and then you'll see here too actually that there's the if other reasons beds are not available. You can describe. Okay, put family in room, says Amy. Put family in room, which is very straightforward. So this is how we'll treat that particular case. But otherwise, some people have been answering reasons beds are unavailable, thinking that if someone's sleeping in the bed, it's unavailable. But that's not what we're looking for with this particular number. We're looking for the number of beds other than the occupied beds that are unavailable for reasons such as holding, renovations, repair, etc. So just a bit of clarity there. So the number of occupied bedrooms So this is the number of bedrooms that have beds in them with people sleeping in those beds. The number of unavailable bedrooms are the bedrooms that don't have anyone sleeping in them, but aren't available because of renovations or health reasons or those types of reasons. And we will be removing the occupied by a family from that list to help make that question a bit clearer. Okay. All right. Okay, actually we've got a question here. So I've been saying an occupied room for the answer to other. Oh, that's perfect. That's a perfectly fine response. So don't worry about that. Again, the changes will be coming soon, and so whatever you've been doing, so long as the counts are right, so the numbers that you're actually entering in terms of number of occupied beds and bedrooms versus unavailable beds and bedrooms, those numbers are really the crucial part of it all. So, okay. So that's the data entry side of things. Now, second stage shelters also, do we have anyone from a second stage shelter here? Second stage shelters have their own tab, which isn't visible here, but I can show you in the activity list. So you will go through the same process of searching for your organization, and you will have a tab associated with this activity, occupancy for second stage, and this is completed once a month. So you'll complete this once a month. Again, number of occupied apartments or number of apartments that have a family staying in them. The number of unavailable apartments are the apartments that don't have a family staying in them but are unavailable for other reasons, such as closed for health reasons or renovations, cleaning or maintenance, and that type of thing. So second stage is a bit more straightforward. So you'll complete that once a month. And it is also, for those of you reporting to Human Services, will also be submitted as part of your export to HS each month. Okay, so we've covered a bit of the data entry side of things. We've alerted you to the fact that any question that has an alert reminding you that it is either a priority field or a provincial reporting requirement does have to be answered as often as possible. And now I'm going to take you through the reports. So there's a two-part process to reviewing your reports for before you submit them to Human Services. So we have two folders that you will use for these reports. We have new HS reports. These are the reports that you actually run and export, and that export then gets attached to an email that you submit to Human Services. And then we have the new HS Schedule D interim reports. So these are reports. So we're looking at the modified May 30th versions. You will choose your program type. So the formatting of the reports are slightly different depending on the type of program that you're running them for. So please do choose the reports in the appropriate folder. For our purposes here, I'm going to choose emergency residential reports. Okay. So these are all of the reports that pull the Schedule D elements that we discussed. So all of those questions that are flagged in red for you. And they're broken down in order of your Schedule D contract. So this is how they appear in the contract itself. So you have your utilization counts. So this is the client served, women and children. You have your daily occupancy for residential emergency shelters. You have your number of discharges as well as reasons for discharge, services and referrals for both women and children. And you have your admissions for women and children. So these are just really counts. So admissions, discharges, and clients served are counts of women and children, so they apply to both groups, who stayed in your shelter during the reporting month. Length of stay, we can open this up. This is pulling across the network, so it might be a little bit slow, but the length of stay for women is calculated using the discharge question and the admission question. So because it requires a discharge date in order to calculate length of stay, all of our demographic questions, so all of the queries to follow here, so we've got length of stay, number of children per woman, types of abuse, age, gender, family composition, province, region, referral source, and background. All of these are based on women discharged. So when you're counting all of your responses to these questions, we want them to add up to the number of discharges that we've identified for the reporting month. So let's just pull length of stay just for adults. So another thing to note about length of stay is that fairly often women will enter the shelter and they may not stay the night, so you'll complete an intake and they will be discharged the same day. So the shelter directors, so this happened I think about 2 years ago, shelter directors agreed that in order to document that service, that the discharge date entered for those women would actually be the following calendar day, and that their length of stay would be 1 day. So, or else they weren't being counted, they were basically being missed. Yeah. So we want to capture the services provided to those women, and we therefore want to document that they stayed in the shelter at least 1 day. So please note that. If you do have any zeros in your length of stay, or you notice that, well, if you have any zeros, to please adjust the discharge date to be 1 day after the admission day. So here is what the length of stay report looks like. So you can see that you're prompted if anyone is missing an admission date, you are alerted to that. So this could mean one of two things. This could mean that either the admission date is empty for that record, or it could mean that when completing the residential discharge, that rather than completing a discharge that linked to the admission form, a new residential discharge was made and it wasn't properly attached to the residential intake form. And so that form has to be redone so that it's linking to the appropriate intake form. And the way you do that is by looking down the list here and finding the intake form. And it will be indicated by like the admission date, so you'll have the right admission date showing up and the type of program. So you'll want to click on that and then complete the discharge form on that enrollment, and you'll know you're on the enrollment because of the blue arrow and the bolded text. So, okay. Another thing to watch for is just if you have any really, really long length of stays, those may be something you want to investigate just to make sure that somebody wasn't forgotten or the wrong date wasn't put in for either the admission date or the discharge date, because that will affect your counts as well. Okay, so we'll go back to reports. And I just want to touch on, so in 2014 when the new Schedule D was rolled out, the format for a lot of questions was changed so that some questions were only answered if a preceding question, so preceding, was answered a certain way. So an example of that would be, does the woman self-identify as Aboriginal? So if a woman answers yes, then she has a certain list of questions she will then answer. If she answers no, then she has another list of questions that she'll answer. And so when you're looking at those, the questions that follow the does woman self-identify as Aboriginal, you're going to be looking for a different total than you would be looking for if you were dealing with other questions that everybody answers the same way. Well, not the same way, but everyone is required to answer, such as, say, maybe the types of abuse question, or the region question, or the province question. Okay. So why don't we'll run this report and we can do some troubleshooting together just to give you an idea. So we'll choose our filters. And so it'll just take a second to run. Does anyone have any questions in the meantime? Why is there a new discharge if it does not link? I think I need that one clarified, if you don't mind, Terry. Terry, do you have a microphone? Do you want to maybe clarify your question? We can talk about it. You don't have one? Okay. Right. Okay, so do you mean that sometimes, Terry, when you go into the discharge tab, it automatically takes you to a blank form that isn't linked to the original admission form? Okay, yeah. I don't know, and we've given that feedback to VistaShare, as it would be nice to have it default to the last enrollment. There is something you can do to that form. So I can, if everyone's interested, I can show you. You can set it to default to the latest form on the activity, but it doesn't seem to do it consistently when there's more than one tab, a data entry tab, built into the same activity. So it is something we talked to VistaShare about, but there's not a consistent solution. Yeah, there's no way to remove that option to create a new form, unfortunately. I wish there was, I agree. It can cause quite a bit of grief, but I think it just serves other purposes, and so VistaShare isn't comfortable removing that option, or having, I guess, giving us the option to remove it. I think it's really a matter of really just reminding staff, or maybe you can customize, so you could put an alert message on the form if you'd like to remind them to check that they're attaching it to the right admission form. That would probably be, that's my best solution for you, I think, at this point, is just using either the form actions or some sort of alert message pop up saying, is this connected to the admission? I hope that helps. Okay. So what we've done with the interim reports is we've tried to give you a sense of what number you should be looking for. So for instance, for types of abuse, we've indicated here, so this is answered by women only, or reported on for women only, I should say. So the total will not equal the number of women discharged. And what we mean here is that this is a multi-select question. So one woman could answer as many of these responses that apply. And so we haven't included a total here because it would be confusing, because the total would give you just the number of women who answered the question, not a sum of all of these response choices. So for question 2, so this is reported on for both women and children. So we do want this total. I think I've just pulled for women here. Yeah. I've just pulled for women here, but you will pull this for both women and children's report. So we have 3 women who are missing a birth date. So this question is calculated using the birth date, and we don't have a birth date included here. We have gender, which is reported on for women, for just women. And we have 3 here that don't have that data. So you're really looking for the nones. If you click on this number, so I'll open this in a new tab, it will give you, you will have the option to click into their record. We don't have the option because we're pulling this, all of the identifying information is hidden. But you have the option to click into their record and update all of this data. Anything blue and highlighted you can click on to see a list of who may have that error and allow you to link into their OT file to clean it up. So again, we're looking for the nones, so we've got the family composition here, province, etc. So I'm just going to scroll down to where we get into some of the more, the less straightforward, I guess, totals that we're looking for. So, excuse me. Okay, so like I mentioned, does client self-identify as Aboriginal? We have yeses, nos, unknown, or chose not to answer, and non-responses. So again, we want to pursue the nones as possible data entry errors. And so we would click on this to review that list. But we also want to take note of who answered yes to this question and who answered no to this question, because those are the totals we are looking for as we go down into the next few questions. So for instance, if Aboriginal, please specify. This is answered by women only, and the total should equal the number of women who answered yes, meaning that this question will only appear on the data entry form if a woman answers yes to question 8. This is the same for ordinarily a resident on reserve. The following 2 questions, so question 11 and 12, are focused on, so if a woman is not Aboriginal or does not identify as Aboriginal, was she born in Canada? Then we are looking for a total that matches the no's responded, the no responses in question 8. And just to add another level of confusion, question 12 is only answered by people who answered no to question 11. So if someone was not born in Canada and does not identify as Aboriginal, then we would like to know the length of time they have lived in Canada. And so this total here should match this total here. So we're off by about 4, which isn't so bad. So I hope this is helpful to you, and I hope these prompts are helpful to you. If they can be improved in any way, please give us that feedback. We want these reports to work for you as best as they can. So I'm just going to take you through the called contacts as well, because there are a few conditional questions there that kind of follow the same logic of like, well, if they answered one way here, what else do they have to answer? So I think while this is loading, I'm making note of the time. So we have about 15 minutes left. and these reports run a bit slowly for us at times, so I'd like to just point out a few common data entry errors that we've identified to help you guys with your data cleanup. So I'm going to go into people organizations here. So the report's running in a separate tab, but we'll multitask. We'll do a few things at once. Okay, so along the right here are some of the recent records I've been in. So this is kind of nice because I just know that I pointed this error out in Tinkerbell, or I recreated this error in Tinkerbell's record. So, so just a bit of background, because we've been on Outcome Tracker for 5 or so years now, we're seeing more and more that women who may have stayed in the shelter as children are now coming back as adults. And this was causing some challenges with Outcome Tracker reports. And so what we had to do is in our human services reporting, so the reports that we submit to the province, we had to be very, very specific about role begin and end dates in a client record, just to ensure that somebody wasn't getting counted as both an adult and a child in the same report. And so because we've had to do this, we've noticed that shelters, if a woman comes in towards the end of the month, so say she enters shelter on June 25th, and her file in Outcome Tracker, so she may have completed a paper form, a paper intake with somebody at your shelter, but that intake form doesn't get entered into Outcome Tracker until the beginning of July, for instance. She will not get pulled into your human services reports. So the role begin date and the admission date have to be in the same month in order for a woman to get counted properly in your human services reports. So if you notice that somebody is not showing up in your reports, I would suggest the first thing you look at is her role begin date, her residential role begin date. So yeah, so we've got, this is a June 2nd role begin date, and I believe that was the data entry date at the top, but we're actually interested in her admission date down here, which is May 25th. So this particular record, until her role date is backdated to the month of May, she won't get counted. And we notice that a lot with children as well. So just make note of that. Okay, our report's open, so I'm going to jump back. I hope that's not confusing for everyone. But okay, so let's just run. We'll choose the emergency shelter and the caller and potential client. Okay, while this runs, I'm going to go into another common error. So right now, we're in Tinkerbell's file. So Tinkerbell has stayed in the residential shelter, and now we want to complete an outreach follow-up intake for her. So she's in both programs, or has been in both programs around the same time. So something that has caused confusion, which is very, very understandable, is that we built, so remember how I said, so the activity it's the admission intake form activity, is where all of the data gets stored for all of our intake and discharge information, including residential programs, so our shelter programs, and our outreach programs. And so because of this, we've designed different residential forms and different outreach forms for the two programs, but all of the enrollments show up on both of those program tabs, or the tabs for both programs. So this has been particularly challenging when it comes to discharging people who are in both programs at the same time. So somebody is staying in shelter and also receiving outreach services, and when it's time to discharge them from the shelter program, even though they're carrying on in their outreach services, a lot of shelters have been discharging them from the wrong intake form. And so I just want to remind everybody in working with, if it's not you directly doing the data entry, is really to remind your shelter staff who are completing these discharges to really, really watch for that program name, so to choose the appropriate program name when discharging, even if they're on the other tab. So for instance, like let's go to the outreach follow-up discharge. I'm seeing a link to a residential intake form. And so I have to be very mindful that if I'm going to discharge from the outreach program, that I am looking for the right date into the outreach program and the right program name when I'm completing that. And the same thing goes for completing the outreach follow-up intake. So again, right now I'm looking at a residential intake, and I want to be careful not to overwrite this intake and erase all of this residential information. Instead, I want to create a new outreach follow-up form and fill this out with the right, with the right date, the right program name, etc. So you do have the option to copy the residential form because a lot of this information will be the same. So you can create a copy of, if I click on the residential form here, just one sec. So I'm back in the residential form. I can copy this form. But I do have to ensure that I am updating the type of program, the admission date if it is different. So let's say the program name if this is a question you're using regularly, and any other information that we need. Okay? So I think a lot of you have been through the growing pains of this, but for new administrators, please do follow up if there's still a lack of clarity around this, because this has been a learning curve for all of us, including us at ACWS. Okay, so our report has run. We are now back in the crisis calls report. So we have our types of requests, and this is an important total here, so the residential admission request total. So we really do want the residential admission requests to add up to the total for whether someone is admitted or not admitted. So right now we're slightly over here, but we want this ideally to add up to the total of admitted, not admitted. And then when we get into question 4, so reason if requested but not admitted, the new total that we're working from is the not admitted total, and this is very close. This is awesome. So good work, everybody. So we want to count reasons for not being admitted for all of these individuals here. Okay? And that actually segues really nicely into the last the last common data entry error we've been seeing that we want to alert everybody to. So we have created a lot of prompted fields. So I'm going to create a new form here just to show you, or not, sorry, not prompted fields. We've created a lot of form actions. And so part of what we've done with the form actions is that we only allow certain questions to appear if another question has been answered a certain way. So one example is does client self-identify as Aboriginal? So if I choose yes, other questions appear. But if I copy this form, so let's say we answer all of these questions, so First Nations, and we answer no, that form action is not working properly. Anyway, and so we hit save. Oops. Okay, so now if I create a copy of this form, and I go back to these questions, and I change this answer to no, those other questions disappear, but there's still data in those questions. And so what's happening is that it's affecting all of the subtotals for those questions, because even though this person is being counted as a no here, they're showing up as a yes for some of those other questions, and they will be causing mistakes. So I just want to advise everyone, if you are copying forms, to work backwards through these related questions. So rather than changing this question first, I actually want to change this question first and this question first to make them empty. So they're now click to selects instead of having responses in them. And then I can change this question and it won't affect my totals. And this was a lot more evident in the calls contacts, because I think staff have been copying an existing call contact, and then, yeah, this is my last point. So Amy's reminding me of the time, don't worry. We've got 2 minutes. We'll get this done. Okay, so staff were copying, say, a residential admission intake form, and then changing it to an information request. And so that call, even though it was an information request, was still showing data for a reason if requested but not admitted. And all of these questions that really shouldn't have data in them because it's an information request, not a residential admission request. So please advise your staff if they are going to do that. So if we go down to this type of request and we go residential admission, not admitted, and we answer all of these questions, that if we want to copy and change this, that we have to work backwards. So we have to undo all of this data first before we change this into a crisis support call or into an information request call. So yeah, that's it. So with a minute to spare, we are done our day-to-day administrator, OT administrator training. I hope it's been helpful to you. As we end the session, you will be invited to complete, let me just show you my final slide. You'll be invited to complete an evaluation, and we really do want to develop this format, so we really hope you'll take a few moments just to let us know how we did and what can be improved to make this as effective as possible for you guys to help you with your work. And please, please, please be in touch if you have any ideas for future trainings. We are happy to do them, and it's great that we can record them and make them available to you all the time, which is sort of the intent of doing it this way. So have a super day, and yeah, we look forward to hearing from you soon. Okay, bye.